Sam, today we thought we would talk about market research and surveying simply because coincidentally we just both happen to be working on projects with clients about that, and we thought it would be fun just to share some ideas and observations. But before we get into this, anybody watching this, please subscribe to our Gateway Courses YouTube channel, and then who knows, you may get notified and pick up all sorts of wonderful insights and tips about marketing, branding, and communication. So let's go back to surveys and market research, and we're going to chop this up today in terms of preparation, distribution, and analysis. So Sam, tell me how you started with a sort of, give me some insights and words of wisdom about preparation.
Yeah, well, preparation, I would say it's quite similar to how I would approach another marketing campaign, really. Setting objectives, that's number one. So, really understanding, I say set objectives at number one, it's purpose and objectives. So, what is the overall purpose of us
Right.
conducting this market research, and what are the objectives of it? So, what are we actually trying to discover? What are we trying to understand in our target audience? That's the number one, because if you don't start with that clarity, that vision, it's all going to be very nebulous, and you're going to
Your
be in a
favorite word,
situation.
yeah.
My favorite, I love getting that into any conversation. It's going to be very nebulous, and so we need to understand what our direction is right from the outset. And of course, those objectives and that understanding of what we want to learn can only exist if we know our audience. We have to understand who our audience is.
This is very interesting because the group I was working with, they realized once we started looking into everything, they hadn't properly defined what their goal and their objective was for the survey that they'd run, and they invested quite a lot of money into it. They'd also not spent enough time thinking about who their audience was they wanted to get a pool of 23,000 and they had I think a take up rate of 4%, which was pretty
Mhm.
low, I would argue. And I think that's because they didn't properly understand their audience and they hadn't clearly defined their goal and objective. So we're in the same territory there, I think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. And as I say, if you don't have that correct starting basis, then everything else is very difficult. We talk about distribution and analysis as well, which we'll come to. But if you don't have that clear clarity to begin with, it's going to be very hard to continue. Also, another thing I think to whilst you're doing that process is thinking about bias, because when you start out, yes, you need to understand what you want to understand from your audience, but you also then need to create the right questions to get that information from your audience. But so often lay people, marketers, other people, they will have questions which are biased, and they will have questions which they want to hear a validated sort of answer to. They want to say, yes,
Okay,
that's what we were
give,
hoping
give,
you'd
give
say.
me an example of bias, if you can.
Okay, I've got, I think, at least a couple of good ones. So one is a question where you might say something like, we strive to achieve a 5-star satisfaction rating with all of our clients. What's your satisfaction rating?
Oh,
So
yes, I wonder what they want me to answer. Yes.
so seeding it straight away, in
Okay.
that way. Clearly a bias immediately. And then the second one I would say is about we produce, don't, or no, rather, it would be starting off with, don't you agree that we produce the best possible events in our category? So
How could
again,
I
starting
possibly
with,
not disagree? Yes.
exactly. So if you start off with that position, it's quite clear what you want me to say. It's quite clear what you think of your own
You're
event. And
subliminally
the
loading the question, aren't you? Yeah.
Exactly. And again, that just shows this lack of understanding about the audience again, because you have to be prepared with any market research to have replies and responses that you don't want to hear, that create problems, that are the things that you didn't expect to hear perhaps initially. And that, well, we'll see in a minute, that comes to your analysis at the end and the decisions you make. But you've got to try and look into that bias very early on.
Okay. And going back well, going on to distribution, linking it to audience, what I found with the group I was working with, they wanted to get more younger people to reply to their survey. But because they hadn't properly understood who their audience was and what was important to them, they didn't even also factor in the fact that they probably would do the survey on a mobile device as
Yeah.
opposed to a desktop. And also, they probably weren't going to send more than 9 minutes. And so, when you've got different audiences, how they perceive the survey, how they're going to take it, and how long are they going to spend doing it is really important. And then that also influences how you actually design your survey and possibly
Mhm.
even the wording, the language that you will use for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are, I mean, you've hit most of the, I think, the crucial elements of the distribution there, really, haven't you? And that again, I'd equate to the marketing channels you're going to utilize, because if you understand who your audience are, if you know how long they're likely to spend on it, as you say, the sort of 9 minutes, 12 minutes, I mean, you can incentivize people with a lovely big incentive of some vouchers for something and get them to do 25, 30 minutes. You never know, but that might be a very specialist survey. If it's a very general one,
Yeah.
then, who are you sending this out to? How are you incentivizing them? Are they really going to spend that long actually wanting to complete this survey, even if they're interested in the subject matter? So that is absolutely crucial.
That also raises the point that the tone of voice, the language that you use in order to encourage people to take the survey, because so many people get asked to do surveys and most of us don't really want to do it. So I think the distribution is really important. It's a hard sell getting people to complete surveys, particularly if you're investing time and money in it.
Yeah. And as you've alluded to already about the different generations, for example, and the platforms you utilize. So, are you offering this on multiple platforms? Are you even doing this as a good old fashioned in the mail paper survey, or are you doing it as something, a quick app? At what point are you actually interrupting people's days with this survey? Because quite often, if we're doing market research surveys, it might be that we're getting people to complete this after they've interacted with our brand. It might be that it's a standalone. It might be that it's coming to them out of the blue. You've got to think again about that. It comes back to our personas and understanding who our audiences are and what does their day look like? What's motivating them? The language you're using to get them to do it. Are you sort of preening their ego and saying, "Oh, we'd love to hear from you because of da da da," but also how are you actually putting that into their day and hopefully getting them to complete the survey?
Okay, so we've touched on preparation, distribution, and anybody who's watched some of our videos knows that we like to keep them to around 9 minutes. So we've got what about 2 minutes to talk about the analysis of it.
Excellent.
What's the so important thing about analysis that we should be aware of?
I think there's two critical elements to this. One is how you present the data. So whether that's the visualization of the data, you're going to have a lot of raw data there, which people will get on spreadsheets probably, and most people are not going to be able to engage with that very clearly. It doesn't really tell a story. The data has to tell a story. It has to address the original objectives and the purposes that you had of the market
Good point.
research. And clearly, if this has been commissioned by you, or by the board, by your boss, you've got to think about your internal audiences. Who's actually interpreting this? And if are you interpreting it, does the information you get back actually show a story and help you to answer the questions that you have with that audience? So that's one element of it.
I think this is so important because with the organisation I was working with, they commissioned this survey, and by a large organisation which should be remain nameless, but it does begin with I and end in S, and they produced this great big survey, which was terrible to read. It was so dense, it was so comprehensive in terms of the graphics, the data, then the questions at the bottom of a table in tiny little text, and you really lost the will to live once you looked at it. And if you're investing all of this time in a survey and the output is dense, the information is not well presented graphically, people aren't going to bother to read it, and they're not going to take the lessons away from it. So you waste a lot of money, I would argue.
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely, and that's the one part really, and that's very much connected to this other element I wanted to talk about, which was around the actual what are you doing with this? You're not just filing this report away and saying great, well we've done that, we've ticked a box. There has to be decisions. It's the sort of stop, start, continue effectively. So again, this comes back to not having biased questions. It's finding out the stuff that you didn't want to hear. You didn't want to hear negative answers effectively. But if you're open to hearing negative answers from your audience, you say, gosh, we've got to stop doing this. We've got to start doing this. There's got to be decisions and actions on the back of that survey. I mean, it could be that it proves everything you're doing is marvelous, but that you've still got to have those conscious decisions made once you've interpreted what
In
it's
order
saying.
to get the insights, in order to take action with them and facilitate change as a result of all the effort you've put into the survey. Okay,
Absolutely. Otherwise, there's no point.
so Sam, if people watching this like what they've heard about research and marketing, what should they do next?
Well, the first thing you should do is subscribe to this channel down here on YouTube. And we have an awful lot more information about these topics in branding, marketing, communications. And if you're really interested and you want to take your understanding further, then you should join one of our next gateways. And you can find all the details on that at gatewaycourses.co.uk.